All right. Well, welcome everybody to Entheogenesis, week 5. I'm very excited about this week because we are going to be addressing something that to me is perhaps the most important part of the discernment and skillful means that we need to have when working with the master teacher plants and psychedelic medicines, which is understanding the incredible power of our inner shadow realms and how absolutely necessary, non-negotiably necessary it is to become conscious and aware of our own shadow patterns, to have a beautiful circle in our lives that can hold us accountable, that we've empowered, and that we trust enough. We trust the goodness of their hearts enough, as well as their wisdom and discernment, to let us know if we have blind spots running. And, when we begin to work with the psychedelic medicines, the entheogenic medicines, the master teacher plants, we will just naturally access what I'm calling in this course the inner tar pits. And I call them the inner tar pits because when we start to touch in on them, they are sticky and heavy. And the image I always get is of the La Brea tar pits in Los Angeles. And when I was a child, my parents brought me there. I think we were visiting Disneyland and also went to the La Brea tar pits. And it just blew my mind that whole animals could be sucked down, and the dinosaurs and all these creatures were sucked into the tar pits. And that's a little bit what it's like. Luckily they're within us so we can pull ourselves back out. But to know this inner territory is radically powerful and really necessary so that we have wisdom, discernment, and skillful means about how we can best address these places. So with all of that said, I would like to begin our class today with a prayer. And this is a prayer that I just love this translation. And for just the sake of time, I'm going to just say this prayer in English, although I love the Aramaic translation as well, and learning to speak Aramaic just through prayer. But this is the Lord's Prayer and one of the Aramaic translations, which I just feel is so appropriate for this topic and this day. So if we can take some deep breaths and come in and down. I know I need to do that every moment. Such a big life for each one of us. Mother, Father of the cosmos, shimmering, shimmering light of all. Focus your light within us as we breathe your holy breath. Enter the sanctuary of our hearts, uniting the sacred rays of your power and beauty. Allow your heart's desire to unite heaven and earth, create a sacred union within us. On earth as it is in heaven, help us fulfill what lives in the circle of our lives today. Please forgive our secret fears as we freely choose to forgive the secret fears of others. Let us not enter forgetfulness, tempted by false appearances. From your astonishing fire comes the eternal song, which sanctifies all and renews all eternally within our lives and all of creation. We seal these words in our hearts with faith and trust. Alahim, Amin, Amen. Amen. And there's so much I love within that translation. Really just recognizing how powerful each translation, every way that we interpret one thing and then translate it into another in our world. And just speaking about that prayer and all of the ways it's been mistranslated to profit the empire church state would be probably like, a few days of conversation and involve some amazing scholars. But what I really love and I felt was so appropriate for today was, the line, please forgive our secret fears as we freely choose to forgive the secret fears of others. And, so often when we are called to the sacred plant medicine, the entheogens, the master teacher plants, that we're called because of an unreconcilable inner knowing. And often that arises through our pain and our wounds. Not always. But as we continue on the journey, what we recognize is that there's layers upon layers upon layers of these secret fears, these hidden fears within us. And that really, when they're secret and they're hidden, that's when they have power. But through witnessing, through seeing and through observing and allowing those secret fears to rise up through our consciousness, then they can be liberated into the great beyond. And the more we can witness those inner fears or programs of fear, and really for me, the most accurate translation or interpretation of fear is the acronym false evidence appearing real, which this is woven into the different writings that we share throughout this course with you. And this level of fear is an interconnected web of beliefs, of thoughts, of storylines, of concepts, of worldviews that weave a cosmovision that is both individual and is collective. It informs everything that we see and perceive. And the amazing thing about these psychoactive molecules is that eventually, if we take them, and often this happens just spontaneously, it's not necessarily the intention when we're, in high school and taking a whole bunch of mushrooms or LSD with our friends or in our 20s or 30s. And all of a sudden we realize, what is this place? What are we doing? I'm just remembering this memory of being like 15 on LSD. This was right before I realized I didn't have the tools, the inner tools to deal with the experiences I was having. And I stopped taking LSD. But I was at the 7-Eleven and I was like really hungry. And I got out this money and I started to just look at this money and I was like, what is this? This, like, none of this makes sense at all. Like, this is all a big game, And there's this like natural defrag that happens when we begin to expand our consciousness with the world's most psychoactive agents. However, we want to go into this defrag with consciousness, because if we go in with unconsciousness, we can unconsciously ensnare ourselves in greater illusion with more fear, false evidence appearing real. And because we're here in the sacred circle and within this journey of entheogenesis for true healing, for true medicine, that is a process of awakening from fear illusion, which every illusion is based in separation, into the reality of oneness, into the reality of truth. What is? And the amazing thing about truth, and really why I highly recommend your number one intention always being for the love of truth, is that when we experience truth, and by experience, I mean gnosis, experiential embodied understanding, not the idea of truth and the intellectualization of truth, the relative truth that has become such a dominant aspect of our collective paradigm, especially in the last 4 years, which is a hallmark of the developmental integral phase of multiculturalism, relative truth. If you've noticed, if you look around, like, relative truth is everywhere. There's my truth and there's your truth. And there's whatever truth makes you happy, whatever truth you feel. And that what's great about relative truth and this challenge that we're working with right now, because there is actually truth with a capital T. And that's the type of truth I'm talking about. Relative truth is an illusion. It's all about how we define truth. And in the written materials as well, this week, within the larger program, we've shared the teaching that truth, this is a medicine wheel teaching from our elder Duncan from the Sika Blackfeet Nation. And this is so important. Darcy and I are talking about this every day right now. It's coming up within all of our programs, all the apprenticeships we're offering, the retreats that we just completed. It's so relevant. And we're in a deeper philosophical conversation continually about this. That truth on this level, in order for something to be true, it has to be true for everybody, everywhere, all of the time. For something to be true, it has to be true for everybody, everywhere, all of the time. And if it's not a paradox, it's probably not true. When we begin to experience this level of truth, and we work with truth from this level, we do that inner hard work of actually focusing our consciousness long enough in one direction to find that inner place of truth. What happens is just so phenomenal. It's just so beautiful, because healing is just a natural side effect of experiencing truth. Don't take my word for it. Please don't take this as just another idea. Explore it for yourself. My experience and what I've witnessed in, we've worked with thousands of people in sacred circles over these years. And I've seen this to be true, as in true for everybody, everywhere, all of the time in these years. But when we start to tap into this level within ourselves, we just naturally heal. And for healing to be true healing, and for awakening to be true awakening, and not just some sort of strange experience that is unintegrated, it has to be embodied. And so the hallmark of true awakening is physical healing. And the hallmark of true inner healing is an awakening process. But what can interrupt that, and what can profoundly disrupt this process of gnosis, direct experiential embodied understanding, is these shadow tendencies that really I feel are part of the matrix defrag. And this is cleaning out these patterns of toxicity that we have created in our lives through the illusions of separation. And these patterns of toxicity are not just our own creation. We have also inherited these patterns. And we really talked about this in, the labyrinth of the past. And if we enter into these ceremonial states, if we already have experienced this, if we haven't yet, you will, where that old baggage comes up. So we're not only working with our own patterns, we're working with our inherited patterns. And we inherit these patterns of toxicity and fear, both from our family, our culture, and the collective. Now, the only fear that has true power is the fear that has not been inquired into. And we want to enter a journey of befriending fear. Because fear as a feeling in our bodies is an essential component of our internal guidance system. There's a saying from Richard Rudd, who created the Gene Keys, which is perhaps the most important book I've ever read on the nature of shadow, and is, I feel, a sacred text of these times. And there's many fans in this larger community of Gene Keys and Cosmic Tea, whose songs were, part of the deepening practices each week. He's a Gene Keys ambassador who does Gene Key readings. It's a phenomenal cosmology, is incredibly helpful. And what Richard Rudd says is fear is safe. But when we don't find a way within ourselves to befriend our fear, then we enter this place, this space, which is pretty much the dominant place that most all humans are living within, which is the projection of the shadow out. And if we don't learn to reconcile these inner shadow aspects and both our repressive and our reactive tendencies within the inner shadow, which are all the shadows or aspects, expressions of this unreconciled fear. If we don't learn how to reconcile that by doing the hard work of turning towards and facing, embracing, learning from, turning the light on, which is pretty much, the analogy, it's like so almost cliche at this point, but really, really apt, which is a lot of these inner places are like that dark closet that hasn't been opened up for a long time. When you turn on the light, it's messy. There's cobwebs, there's spiders, there's spooky things. And the work is to go in and clean it out, And if it feels like too big of a job on our own, which usually it is, we bring in the team, right? And people who aren't really bothered by some cobwebs, doesn't freak them out too much because they've already cleaned that up in themselves. So the question of how do we alchemize our shadow to become rich medicine is very, very relevant. For when we take and we imbibe these divine sacraments, our shit's going to come up, excuse my language. Our shadow is going to be projected out because we cannot reconcile what we cannot see. And so the process of going about this is where the skillful means about going about this is where, I hope this week's module, this week's teaching can really serve you. Because do we fight with a shadow? One of our elders calls it shadow dancing or shadow boxing. I like shadow dancing a bit more. I like to dance. It's like, can fight about it or you can dance about it. And like a good dance off, that's like just more appealing to me than shadow boxing. But you know, whatever flavor you like. Do we go to war with ourselves? You know, how do we meet the adversary? Because there are adversarial archetypal energies that both live within us and live within this world. And how we meet the adversary, both within and in the other, says everything about where our current developmental phase, our spiritual developmental maturation process is. And there are pathologically destructive energies on the planet. There are. You know, there's pathological energies, there's pathos, there's illness. And we've got to be able to have some tools to work with that. But we can't work with that in the outer realms until we've reconciled that within. Because that pathos, that seed of distortion, lives within everybody. The shadow is within all. And so the work isn't about, in my view, eradicating the shadow. It's about reconciling and integrating. And there are some places within that are so dense with this unprocessed toxic energy that so often in our culture is just sort of like labeled trauma. You know, it's like, but like, you know, what that can be for people, like the challenges of life here. You know, and we've had like, I can't even count how many people who've come to ceremony who've lost their child to suicide or overdose, or some of the other tragedies that happen here. Now that's a very intense, very heavy place. And layered in there, all different aspects. Shame, guilt, you know, shoulda, woulda, coulda, like it's a complex state. And when we work with the sacred plant medicines, we need to understand those complex states, those inner, like dense, heavy, dark places, the tar pit, you know, it's going to come up. It's not like, will it? It's just when it. That didn't make any sense. It's not will it. It's like, it will. It's just when. There, that made more sense. And so, you know, this is honestly a process that, you know, requires such great heart. And this willingness to show up for true healing in the face of what is inconceivable tragedy, loss, challenge. And we're all survivors. You know, some of us have survived more and greater challenges than others. And none of us leave this life unscathed. But it's not about being unscathed, the healing journey. It's actually about, you know, it's like that beautiful Japanese pottery where when one of those handmade vessels cracks, then they fill that crack with gold and it makes it even more beautiful. Now that's a bit of what we're up to and doing. But if we're not working with integral heart-centered guides, then the reality of how likely it is that trauma will be more shattering with the plant medicines and entheogens is really high. It's all about the container. And we can do that inner preparation work, but honestly, there's just places that we cannot meet on our own. None of us can. The only reason I've been able to heal as much as I have, which is profound, like full-bodied healing, which did take everything from me. It was 100% devotion and dedication for many years, you know, and a lot of failures, a lot of learning what didn't work over and over, and then be like, oh, but that worked really good, you know, like that process I could not have done. There's no possible way unless I was met by incredibly heart-centered and integral practitioners when it really mattered. And there was times where I wasn't. And there's nothing like being shattered by a plant medicine ceremony and picking up the pieces of your psyche for 9 months. That sucks. You know, and then to be like, oh, it must be something that's wrong with me. And then doing it again. You know, I did that twice in a row, thinking, oh, I just am somehow missing it. Maybe I just need to go back. Other people seem to be having a good experience. It's like crazy town. And so I've both been met with incredible compassion and healed remarkable and deep pain. And I've also not been met with compassion and taken too much medicine too fast. It was too overwhelming. And I shattered and fractured. But the gift in that for me, the one huge gift, the one that I could find besides learning the hard way what not to do, is that my level of compassion for anybody coming to work with us is profound. Nobody has ever freaked out as much as me in ceremony. The bar is really high. But that's a good thing, right? There's no judgment. We sometimes have to like have those massive failures, that falling flat on our face, so that then we can pick ourselves up again. And, you know, as we dust ourselves off, be like, wow, okay, you know, how could I possibly judge another person's process when I just did that twice? All right. So the shadow and the shadow realms, the inner tar pits. So the shamanic journey on the big, broad levels, on the meta level, is a mythic journey. And in fact, when we're entering the realm of shamanic states of consciousness, which is both the entheogens, the psychedelic medicines, really strong breath work, and any increased and intense shift in our state of consciousness. Because shamanism, you know, there's a few different foundational premises. One is that everything is alive. Everything is sentient. And therefore, we can create relationship with everything. Each tree is both a physical tree and it's a spirit. And then that one spirit is comprised of many different spirits. Every leaf is a spirit. Every branch is a spirit. And each spirit is alive and has sentience. So that's one overarching view of earth-honoring animistic traditions, aka shamanism. The other major component of all shamanic traditions is this shifting states of consciousness. So we expand or shift our state of consciousness to be able to access more information within that larger spirit or living field of life. You know, in modern day language and vernacular, it would be shifting our brain state from our day, our kind of operational state during the day, our beta, our high beta, being able to drop down at will, at cue, in training ourselves to drop down into the theta state, the alpha state. And then from that deeper, wider state of consciousness, be able to access more information within the quantum field or the non-local field, which is where memory is held. So what's important to understand as we enter into this shifting of consciousness is that we're entering into the mythic state. So every shamanic journey is a mythic journey. And really, the mythic experience and mythic encounters of the plant medicine journey show within us powerful archetypes. Now, recently, one of our community members who is sitting with us in circle and retreat in Costa Rica, we were sharing more of the shamanic worldview, but that was really hard for her to grasp or grok because it was just so far out of her experience in life. But once again, as we brought in Carl Jung and Jung's work and the field of psychology that was birthed from the Jungian perspective, all of a sudden the pieces came together. Because Carl Jung is still one of the most important bridges we have from Western psychology into the earth-honoring animistic world. And so when we understand archetypes and allegory, we begin to be able to have a wiser and wider view of what's actually happening within a shamanic journey. So a shamanic journey can be, like a plant medicine journey, but let's use the shamanic journey that is, something that's more cross-cultural, which is working with the drum, creating a heart drum beat, which begins to help shift the consciousness into an altered state. And then across the world, the shaman would embark upon an inner journey going in and down, usually through a hole in the earth, a cave, a spring, the roots of a tree, spiraling in and down to the lower world, what's known within the Andean cosmovision as the Uku Pacha. Uku Pacha. Uku, inner, Pacha, world, time, space, reality. The Uku Pacha, the inner world. And so the shaman would go through a journey. And if you participate in the Pachacuti Mesa tradition, we work with this often, almost every weekend. As you do this journey, then there's an encounter. And almost every shamanic journey is the hero's journey. So again, we fall into the archetype. We understand that archetype of the hero. There's an encounter with guides. There's an encounter with challenges. There's obstacles to overcome. Every obstacle, every guide is a representative. It's a symbolic representation of a different power or energy or frequency in the planet. And so owl appearing as a guide is a very different archetypal totem than the serpent or the amaru. And we just innately and intuitively know that, like, oh, owl is different than the serpent, or the hummingbird is really different than the elephant. So you have these different guides. And then the journey of the hero, it's the quest. There's the challenges. There's the treasure. We go on the journey. We go all the way up to the mountaintop, and then we come all the way back down. And each journey, while being archetypal, is also an allegory. And honestly, understanding allegory to me is one of the hallmarks of greater initiation. Because in our world, if we look at what's being offered to us through our media, through our politics, through this larger shared collective storylines, and we look at it through the lens of allegory, it's like, wow, there's some really big teachings there. So an allegory is a teaching in story form. And so the allegory is a teaching in story form. And so every shamanic journey or plant medicine ceremony is an encounter with the mythic, where the inner archetypes within play out a larger story within our lives. And the story, the teaching, holds an essential piece of wisdom for how to reorient ourselves, to re-encounter ourselves, and reimagine our lives. I feel that every mythic encounter on this level is truly a communion with our soul. Because this is direct experience. It's an inner process, an inner mythos unfolding. And within that true essential nature, that just inherent wisdom begins to come into communication. And this process deserves the deepest reverence and respect. Reverence because it is so sacred. That encounter of soul within you is, to me, one of the most sacred things in this life. When we're actually in that place, that's where true healing happens. This experience of truth. And it's mythic often because the only way we can actually get there is by moving into a bigger field of understanding, out of the literal into the symbolic. And it deserves incredible respect because these are powerful forces. These archetypal forces are powerful. They give both life and death. The archetypal forces within you bring life, and they also bring death and rebirth. So it's best to not play, with this power, with hubris and lack of consciousness. Hubris is the overarching shadow within the psychedelic renaissance and the work currently happening on the planet with the plant spirit medicines. Now, hubris is a meta theme within so many myths, so many cultural stories. That unconscious overconfidence and what maybe in our culture we call entitlement. It's like, I'm just so awesome. I got this. It's also known in psychological terms as the Kruger-Dunning effect. I just learned that this year from a friend of mine who's a psychologist. And I was like, oh my gosh, Kruger and Dunning figured it out. We've been calling it hubris, but it's basically having a little bit of knowledge about something and feeling like, God, I got it figured out. Where a little bit of knowledge, a little bit of wisdom in a place of immaturity can be a great danger. And in fact, can really, really not just mess up our own lives, but even with good intention, create great harm. So reverence and respect, being present, are mitigating factors to unconsciousness and harm. Just take a breath there. It's a pretty big download. And I know when I get into teaching like this, I speak really quickly, and that's just how it moves through. So hopefully the teachings are landing, and luckily this is recorded, so can listen back if you need to. All right. So how does this practically apply to our lives? So we are each at a journey with the plants, which I just love, that no matter what our age, what life we have lived, the incredible challenges, the incredible gifts, the wisdom, the cultivation of virtue, that the plants always meet us where we are at. And so in any circle, whether we've drank 1,000 times or it's our first, that totally fades away. It's kind of irrelevant, except for the people who are in support or holding space. Experience really matters there. But what matters even more than experience is kindness and compassion. We're bringing those together, and you got what we're looking for in practitioners. But being there for the experience, what really matters is that we all drop into the sacred. And from that, all of our lives lay the foundation for the next leading edge of our evolutionary journey. And the plants can help us to see and feel and experience what's been hidden to us. And that's usually what we need to know. We need to illuminate that in order to receive the teaching, apply it, and then be able to reorient the direction of our lives. Or if we're not there for ourselves, but we're there in prayer for another, to be able to offer that energy, that medicine, that blessing to another. Now, I think one of the most important things to understand is that how strong and intense these experiences are with the plants, and of course, the designer molecules as well, is dose dependent. And so, when we are working with these very powerful psychoactive agents, how much we take really impacts our experience. And I've been in ceremonies and lineages of practice. And I mean, honestly, this has been more common than not. I think it's changing now with how the medicines are moving through the planet more and more. But the master shaman, the ayahuasquero, this was where Brazilian Yopo lineages, Venezuelan Yopo lineages, ayahuasca traditions from the Amazon. Our first was Shuma mentor. Our second was Shuma mentor, where the practitioner chose the dose. And what happened for me in that was having a very, very, very sensitive constitution. I was really overdosed multiple times. And that wasn't intentional at all. But for me, it's taken years to realize that 1 gram of mushrooms is a heroic journey for me. And some of these guys can take I just met somebody who's like, oh yeah, I took 15 grams of mushrooms. And I'm like, that's the craziest thing I've ever heard. That's the craziest thing I've ever heard. And there's people who practice. I've heard different stories of people who practice with, say, the mushrooms and give everybody a standard dose of 7 grams. To me, this type of practice is reckless endangerment. And frankly, there's reckless endangerment happening around dosing all over the place within the ceremonial worlds and the psychedelic therapy worlds. People do not take this seriously enough. And to hear of practitioners who are trained, who call themselves all sorts of titles, who are also Western trained counselors, psychologists, doctors, mixing plants and molecules in large doses with the idea that it gets into a certain part of the nervous system and can help to heal this and this and this. But the effect of the people who are coming to us afterwards for healing is such a profound level of dysregulation that, there's not words for it, except for reckless endangerment. So really taking this to heart about dose. We can have a very powerful and incredibly productive experience where we are connecting, we're resourcing, we're building and feeling this mythic journey, usually with far less than we think that we need. It's a immature way to approach the plants, to think that the bigger the experience, the bigger the healing. That is not true. It's just not true. And I feel a little feisty about it because we've just had so many people who've been coming just even in the last year, let alone last 5 years, that have been really seriously negatively impacted by overdosing and stacking different plants and molecules. So the antidote to this is to work in circles and with practitioners, or if you're in your own practice, and really research what those plants are. What are the alkaloids? What have other people been doing? And then to start slowly on the modest side. Unless you want to be like me and overdose for years and need to put yourself in the shower for an hour and a half, rocking and being like, I'm going to come back. I'm going to come back. It's like, I just don't want that for other people, but you might need to have that journey. I needed to have it, and here's Darcy. He's just having a great time. He's good. He's just like super shanti. And I'm in the shower for an hour and a half, just like praying and praying and praying, because that was too much for my system. Okay. So I kind of went off a little bit on that, but sometimes you just gotta let it out. Okay. So with the plants and with ceremony, once we address the dose piece, coming to ceremony with an intention really matters. Because the plants are going to go both in the direction that we are aimed, as well as what needs care within us first. And so it's a paradoxical inner stance of having an intention and allowing that to be what aims and directs us, as well as being willing to let go of any perceived outcome into the wisdom unfolding within that mythic experience. Because so often the plant medicines, and even if you're working with psychedelics as well, that you'll go to the biggest challenge in your life first. And this can be pretty frustrating, and often when we have an intention, it's a little bit counterintuitive how the plants bring us to that intention. So for example, if you have the intention, freedom from feeling that I am unlovable. It's like, I want to feel lovable. I want to feel wanted. I want to actually really be able to experience that. Then most likely you're going to be guided to all the feelings, memories, and body sensation and information stored within your body that's related to this. And most of the times that's all the feelings of not being lovable and all the memories that reinforce that, which in the moment is like, WTF, what's going on? Why is this happening? I thought I came here to experience love, but I'm actually experiencing all these ways I felt unloved. And what we have seen to be true with a capital T, as in true for everybody, everywhere, all the time, is that in order for something to heal, we must first become conscious of it. And so this is really like the energetic foundation of purging, of what we call purging in the ceremonial world, which is something coming from deep within our unconscious, rising through our consciousness to be released. And so first, in order to heal something, we first become conscious of it. And the plant medicines can be like a plug into our inner world. And that can include both the shadow, as in the subconscious, and like the bigger gifts of the psyche or the superconscious. And so when we pull that plug, the velocity of what comes through can be either a drip or a torrent. And when it's a torrent, which is usually dose dependent, like we want to have like a nice flow, but we don't want to drown, or be fractured. That when we have that nice flow, then we can kind of consciously process what's coming through. And that can be incredibly helpful. Now, there's some times where it's just going to be coming so fast and intense that you just got to let it out. And that's really the time when having those very compassionate facilitators or supports that have the capacity and the skillful means to help you meet that is so important, because it is way beyond what our personal psyches can handle often. And the plants, in my experience, will always bring us to that edge, like whatever they give is what we can handle, but it often feels like more than what we can handle. There's that edgy bit to it. And this old information can arise in many ways. It can be just mundane, unprocessed information, or it can be really toxic old memories. It can be old thought patterns, images. The most toxic source of information in our lives is the media. Like we now understand that we have mirror neurons in our brain, and that really on a deep level, that we don't know the difference between what we witness happening on the outside and what's happening on the inside. There's not really that filter, not on a deep primal level, because we are wired for the truth of our interconnection. And so media is probably one of the most toxic sources of what lives within us. Pornography, it's terrible. Ceremonies purging that out, it's horrible. Violent movies, the themes that are like constantly being pushed in our world, separation, othering, enemy, death, violence, is crazy. It's literally insane. And that's stored within us. And so that will come out. And the gift in that is that then as that liberates, we feel clearer, we feel whole. And then we can see when that information's coming in again, like, oh, I don't think I'm going to let that one in this time. I'm going to seal that up. I'm no longer going to participate at that level of the game. But other things that can also arise that are really wild when we're in especially the strong ceremonies with the sacred plant medicines, because they are deeply cleansing and detoxifying, which is so good. They help to heal our bodies. Where I find the psychedelic medicines, I believe I've mentioned this before, but I'm going to just say it now, that the isolated molecules of the psychedelic medicines, the designer molecules, I feel like they address in the wheel of life, in the medicine wheel, they address pretty well the mental and emotional levels of the wheel. This is why with the beautifully curated protocols of psychedelic therapy that involve therapy, counseling, co-therapists, and a very strategic approach to those big experiences, and then the integration of, can address such deep and profound trauma as post-traumatic stress from war, first-line responders. It's profound, it's beautiful. And those mostly work on the mental and emotional levels, which is great, but it's also missing the spiritual and body. And for that level of spirit to body. And the sacred plant medicines address the whole wheel. So I find them a superior approach to healing with the entheogens. Because as we're spiritually reconnecting, we're healing the body. And these plants are radically healing, detoxifying, cleansing, toning for our whole bodies. And of course, you want to work with facilitators who understand the counterindications of certain modern illnesses, and especially pharmaceuticals with the plant medicines. But with all that said, one of the things that we can also purge out with the plant medicines is old toxins from the environment, from food. There was a ceremony with ayahuasca when I was in my first intensive with the 10 ayahuasca ceremonies and my first trip to Peru, where the level of physical detox was like nothing I've ever experienced. It was like there's what's known in natural healing medicines as a Herxheimer effect, which is that when you're doing a strong cleanse or detoxification process, that you actually get sick a bit as you're purging out those toxins. And this was the whole journey for me. I was kind of like off and on. I would have the shakes and the chills. I'd be sweating. But there was one ceremony where I was purging out artificial flavors and smells. And it was like I was throwing up all these old flavor agents. And I could feel them, like I was sweating them out. I jumped, there was a shower in the Maloka there, and I got in the shower twice because it was so gross. And then throwing up all these old flavors and having them through my nose and my mouth. It's like artificial raspberry, artificial butterscotch. It was gross. And obviously after that, I was like, I never unnatural flavors freak me out. But mostly because I had that experience of like, oh, this is the synthetic. This lives within me. I need to purge it out. And those different synthetic flavor agents have very disruptive effects on our neurological and endocrine systems. And so if we're healing endocrine disruption or we're healing certain neurological conditions, we're going to want to get those out. So that, as well as so much more. I'm at another ceremony where it's just clearing out my whole nose and different smells. It was really wild. Okay. So with all of this said, the inner tar pits, the La Brea tar pits within, are something to be aware of and conscious of, and honestly, to approach with great respect. Because when you're in a strong ceremony and you're like, oh, there's a line of insanity, because there is actually a line. Maybe that's another part of the map of Entheogenesis, like the cliffs of madness. I don't know if anybody in the circle has experienced those. I have. I've stood right at the edge. I'm like, that's where people go and they don't come back. Like this one friend of my dad's when I was a child who was just not right. And at one point I was like, Dad, what's up with your friend? I was like 10. He's like, oh, he went to an Ozzy Osbourne concert in the 70s and he took too much acid and he never came back. You know, and then there was a later ceremony at Burning Man where not ceremony, psychedelic experience. And I was like, oh, that's the cliffs of madness. That's the La Brea tar pits. Let's not jump off that cliff edge. And it's good to know that not every experience, is going to be one of love and light and harmony. But when we're working with lineage and practitioners, and we're in our deep place of reverence and respect, reverence for the sacred and the beauty of these ceremonial ways, and respect for their power and the power that lives within us of these inner archetypes, the power of our shadow. Then we can begin to be in a process where we little by little resource. We little by little turn towards these places with loving kindness. And that is the process that actually transforms and alchemizes, that becomes a divine solvent for that tar substance, right? It dissolves it, but we can't do that all at once. And if we don't have the conditions for healing, if we haven't built in those conditions that are requirements for the sacred space that we have been talking about through this journey together, if those aren't there, this isn't possible. Those are just necessary components. We have to have love, compassion, spiritual sovereignty, body autonomy, consent. All right. Well, we've been covering a lot of ground, and honestly, we're just barely scratching the surface. And Darcy and I have an entire body of work around the shadow dancer and shamanic tools and shamanic wisdom to meet these different shadow realms, especially some of the more complex psychic phenomenon that happens when we enter these states. And we're hoping to have this space and time in our schedule to bring this body of teachings out in the fall. However, for now, what's important to realize is that each and every one of us enters these places to transform and to integrate the shadow. And that as we go through this process, little by little, we build spiritual power. For whatever we heal becomes soul power. And so as we turn towards these inner places, we truly can begin to liberate stored up energy in the form of shadow into gifts and into divine power. And strangely enough, the entheogens, psychedelic medicines, and plant spirit medicines help us to get sober. And I call this the sobriety paradox, that we take the world's most psychoactive agents to get sober. This is why we have so many in our community who are in this 12-step program, and not all communities within 12 steps recognize that these are different than drugs, and not everybody approaches them differently than that. But the wildness of the sobriety paradox is that we take the world's most psychoactive agents to get sober to how we've been creating our lives. And part of that is through witnessing and seeing these inner shadow dynamics. And this week we're working in the guided practice with the Ascended Masters. And so we're consciously working with the Ascended Masters because they have already been through the human journey. And yes, this is a whole realm of consciousness. This is the realm of the Buddhas, the Bodhisattvas, the Taras, the Magdalens, the Marys, the Christed beings. There's countless Ascended Masters from all over the world. And they can really help us with addressing this aspect of the human experience. And so as we work with these beautiful plants and entheogenesis, we can call in this higher level of support to meet some of the greater challenges that we face here. All right, well, I could talk about this for a couple more hours, but we are definitely at time. There is some very rich information in the deepening materials for this week, within the written materials for the larger course, all around this. And I welcome you to add any questions you might have, any reflections into the Signal group. And we'll also address those in person. So for those of you who are present here in this live call, thank you so much. We honor you and we appreciate you. I'm going to stay a bit later for any questions or reflections today. And we've had a few questions through the Signal group and through email that I'm going to address now. And then we're going to have this as a separate recording on the Teachable website. Thank you so much. Ayu Masi Kanapa. We are all one family, all my relations. All right. Well, thanks for hanging out with me for this. And I'm wondering if before I know that some of you will have to go because we're over time, but I am going to address any personal questions or direct questions now. And I'm also got a few questions that have been submitted, and we will have this for our recording on class. And so maybe what we can do is if you have questions in this group, I will address those first, and then I'll go to the pre-submitted questions. All right, let me see if I can pull up my chat. There we go. Okay. Thank you so much, Tracy. Okay, well, I'm going to go to this question then. So if you have any questions, you can put them through the chat. All right. Okay. All right, so I'm going to address one of the submitted questions, which is, could you talk about the physical sensations associated with taking Washuma? In particular, the sensations that accompany the onset. I'm sure these must be individual, but in your experience, what are the most common effects? For myself, I notice that when the medicine is building in my body, it vibrates as if it's trying to fly like a hummingbird. Thank you for this very perceptive question. And with Washuma, the ancient totem of Washuma is the hummingbird. And that hummingbird totem is on so many levels. But one is actually that vibration, which does feel like the flutter of a hummingbird's wing. The other onset of different sensations is really, it is a very personal process. But what we were first apprenticed within is that there's 7 distinct phases within the experience of Washuma. Now, we always joke that we've only been able to count up to 5, but like there's these unique, distinct phases. And that initial entering into the medicine with Washuma, I personally love because it's such a gentle transition versus mushrooms or ayahuasca or some other plants that are a much quicker transition. And so with Washuma, it's usually a long, slow, gentle transition with a dreamy-like state, a place of deep relaxation. Different sensations can begin to arise, and that vibration, like a hummingbird, can be there. Depending on the inner content that someone's working with, it can be different too. Sometimes the medicine comes on very quickly, sometimes it takes a while. But to know that, with any medicine in that initial entering phase is all about the breath and becoming present. And there's more I could share, but I feel like that's fairly complete for now. Okay. Are there any other questions within the group that's live on the call now? Whether you'd like to voice them on the screen or in the chat.
Okay, maybe I voice a question. What can you do when you find yourself experiencing an intense purging in a ceremony, and you don't really know what it is you're purging, right? Like, other than being present and breathing, is there techniques that you have that could render the experience a little bit more significant in like meaning ways, or, you know, just trying to understand what it is that you're going through?
Mhm. Yeah, absolutely. Well, I haven't had a lot of success being both in the experience and simultaneously understanding the experience. I think that's actually one of the biggest blocks to healing, is this, like, we're in it and it's trying to move, and then there's this sort of like compartmentalization of our consciousness of like trying to understand what's happening while at the same time experiencing what's happening. And that can be that can actually cause more stress than just allowing the movement of the energy. Now, and it's very challenging to do this when you're in the depth of strong cleansing. Like, this is where it's like, is this work easy? No, it's really not. Like, yeah, taking MDMA, that can be easy, it can also not be. But working with the sacred plant medicine teachers for deep healing, this is radical, full body, full psyche, full soul transformation. And it's not an easy path in moments. It's beautiful. There's deep and lasting transformation, and there's really strong physical healing that can take place, but it's not easy. And the biggest thing that causes, in my experience, my own personal experience, and then with others, even more dissonance, is that divide. And so how to practice then when we're in the intensity of life, giving ourselves permission, or trusting ourselves, trusting life enough to know that understanding will come. It always does, but when we're right in the thick of it, it's not the time for understanding. It's the time for birthing ourselves. It's like in the middle of childbirth, there's no way out but through. Really, plant spirit medicine ceremonies are a form of birth, and there's no better preparation for birth than drinking plant medicines. Like, for me, when I was giving birth, I was like, oh my gosh, I've been here before. I've been here before. So I could, like, there's a practice, there's an inner development of the consciousness being able to surrender into the experience, knowing that meaning will be made, but after the fact. And we want to wait for that, because then it doesn't block the transformational energies. If we try to understand it too much, too fast, it actually inhibits the cleansing process. It inhibits the move of the energies. And I say all of that saying it is really challenging, however, to be in the thick of a ceremony where we're purging from the very depths of our being. And often it's not clear. Often it's very murky. But then on the other side, eventually there's a moment where there's a spontaneous understanding of like, oh, that's what was being moved. And I would say, wait, if you're in that process, to see if you can give yourself permission to not understand, to experience, and then to know that understanding will come. To utilize those big challenges in life, in the ceremonies and outside of the ceremonies, as true opportunities to awaken to a deeper truth of reality. know, but that's not necessarily easy, and it's not very common either. So that's what's in my heart to share. Thanks so much for your question. I hope that's relevant. Mhm. Okay.
I have a question,
Oh
Robin.
yeah. Hi there, Dana.
Hi. It's actually around what you were describing around the archetype and the allegory and the shamanic journeying. And I was really being struck around curiosity of like how you simply practice the allegory aspect of like that story. Like what simple pieces are you using to like engage in story to, because like I feel like that's also just speaking to what you spoke to, because even in that healing process of like this great cleansing and moving of energy in the body comes the story, right? Of like coming around circle of like what was that, like the clarity that resides in it. So I'm curious about what you like, what practices you use to engage in that aspect of the shamanic journeying.
Oh, well, awesome. Thank you so much. This is such a great question. Well, you know, to me, the shamanic and mythic experience is not the idea of an archetype, but the experience of being within the archetype. And so, you know, a really good example of this is the shamanic dismemberment and death process. So like an inherent aspect of of like initiatory journeys with the mystery schools and the shamanic lineages are, you know, is being dismembered, like literally in a ceremony, in a journey. And this can be it's so hilarious because when people are like, so in the ceremony, there was these wolves and they came and they started eating my body and they were taking different parts of me away. You know, we're like, oh, that's amazing, you know, but like that person in the moment, it's like, that's, you know, was like, that was freaky, like, you know, what's happening. And it's like, because actually when I'm in this experience and I've been in this experience, it's actually not the story out there, but the embodied experience of the archetype. And so with the dismemberment, you know, it's this understanding of like, we have to be taken apart in order to reform. And then when we begin to look at the mythos, which is different than myth, you know, myth often in our culture is seen as, it's like been diminished. You know, in our scientific, reductionistic, materialized worldview, myths hold, you know, are seen to have just be stories. But myths and then mythos are some of the most powerful parts of being human. And so when I have, you know, when I'm in a process and I can begin to tune into what archetypal energy is moving through, then I can begin to connect to what within me is being expressed, which is, you know, say like just going back to dismemberment, is like learning how to have aspects of me die is really essential, you know, because there can't be rebirth without that death. But that's probably the biggest fear that any of us have. And I know for me, it's been a huge one. I've just felt like I've spent so much of my life grappling with this fear of death and this desire for life. You know, and if I'm honest, that still comes up all the time, you know, especially now being a mom and having a little one and all those different aspects of whether it's my death or somebody else's death. And so this process of learning, you know, where that death process happens within and then where the rebirth happens. And so that's one practical application, is to recognize that we in this work inhabit the archetypes more than the idea of the archetypes. However, later, you know, we tell the story of our lives. And it's so important to understand that we are meaning makers and we're storytellers. And our stories and our beliefs are the most powerful things in our world. Yeah, there's a sun and this, you know, day and night and these primal forces. But what is the most powerful thing within the world on the human level? In my inquiry into it, it's a belief taken to be true. It's a story about the nature of life. One belief is the inception of all war. It's like one belief taken to be true, one story. And so when we begin to become conscious of how powerful we are in the stories that we tell of our lives and how we can reimagine ourselves, understanding and spending a little time researching and getting comfortable with archetypal energy and allegory is really, really helpful. Both as a reflection tool of like what we just experienced, and then as a creative tool. It's like, well, what do I want to work with? Where do I want to go? So I hope that's helpful. There's more that could be shared with around that, but I feel like that's good for now. Thank you so much. Awesome. Okay, now there's a few people that are heading out. That's no problem. And I have one more question that was submitted to us from a dear sister who's in this circle as well. And she says, there's a question about temples, sacred spaces, sites, god goddesses. You've now have a few represented on her mesa, but she's curious to see if these are represented in the third sphere of sanctuary, the circles of sanctuary. Actually this week in module 5, as we are, we're going to be bringing in the ascended masters, and you can be like really learn this template and this archetypal template of support, this spirit, this structure of the circles of sanctuary, and then feel free to make it your own. If you have certain sacred sites that you work with, if you have certain energies more, instead of ascended masters, more on different archetypal energies of gods and goddesses, you can feel free to pattern those in. And my recommendation is just to learn the circles of sanctuary that we're presenting here and go through each of the weeks. And then from there, see where you would like to add more of your unique guidance team, recognizing that you have unique animals and plants and spiritual forces that you work with. So please make this your own. We entrust it to you. We empower you with this, and may you have a really fun time creating your circles of sanctuary. Awesome. Okay, I wonder if there's any more questions. I see a few people are popping off, which is totally understandable and cool. Thanks, Dana Wilson. Anything else? Oh, any other questions for now? All right. Well, then we'll close for the time being, and we will have an opportunity to address more questions before the conclusion of this course. And I want to thank you all so much once again for joining us and for devoting your time and energy and the power of your hearts to the sacred circle. All right. Many blessings, all my relations. Okay. Bye for now. Okay, awesome. Thanks so much, Genevieve. Bye for now.